Hi, I'm Robert Finnegan, host of the Talking Textiles Special Workforce Series with AFFOA. Learn more about ATA's supporting organization at affoa.org. Now, let's talk textiles. All right, well, welcome everyone to Talking Textiles. I am Robert Finnegan, a member of ATA. I'm also the head of education and workforce for the Advanced Functional Fabrics of America, or AFFOA. This is episode 2 of a 3-part series, Talking Textiles Workforce, a special collaboration with AFFOA and, of course, our partners ATA. The goal of this series is to explore the current and the future of the textiles workforce. We'll be talking today to professionals on hot topics within the textiles and manufacturing industries, helping to inspire others and in your journeys as you figure out textiles workforce within your organizations. Today, we are talking about the current and future impacts on the textiles manufacturing workforce as we move toward a more digitally forward, automated world. I'm joined by industry and manufacturing technology leaders like Caitlin Knowles, digital engineering subject matter expert for AFFOA, a personal colleague of mine and a personal friend. Thank you for joining. Christine Spiegel, the director of marketing for Parkdale Mills in North Carolina. Gabrielle Ferrara, the president of Ferrara Manufacturing, and Jon Zornow, an inventor and founder of Sewbo. Welcome to the podcast. Very excited to have everyone.
Thanks for having us.
I'd like to say a huge welcome, and I'm hoping we might start with each of you just providing a brief overview of your companies, the mission of your companies, and perhaps where you sit in the supply chain. And then additionally, we'd love to hear a little bit about your role with the organization, what your personal mission is, and how you feel like you're making an impact. Why don't we start with Caitlin?
Sure, Robert. Thank you. And this is great to be involved in this topic. I love digital and it's great to be talking about how it relates to workforce. So my name's Caitlin Knowles. I also work at AFFOA, like yourself, Robert. And AFFOA, Advanced Functional Fabrics of America, is a nonprofit based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, with the mission to revitalize U.S. manufacturing. And on a technology front, we support innovations all across the supply chain. So from fiber production to cut and sew manufacturing on to product designers, and really with the emphasis to harden processes and get them to the point where they can be manufactured in the US. And then in terms of my role here, I'm a senior textile engineer, and I lead the digital engineering efforts, really in terms of improving efficiency and modernization in the space. And my background is in materials engineering. I did my PhD in fiber and polymer science. And for the past several years, I've really been trying to merge the physical textile processes with digital workflows. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
Fantastic. Well, every time I talk to you, I learn something. So I'm excited about this conversation. Gabrielle, if you don't mind, I'd love to have you come off and talk a little bit about your organization and your role.
Great. Thanks for having me. Gabrielle Ferrara. I'm the president of Ferrara Manufacturing. We're a family-owned and women-owned business, and we produce some of the finest clothes in the United States. We focus on tailored garments. We primarily make suiting, shirts, and outerwear. And since 1987, we've been working with top American brands on producing their product all here in the United States. We also work with the U.S. military on some of their uniforms as well, their dress uniforms. And excited to talk about this topic because our business, while it originally started focused purely on the craft side and the tailoring side of the industry and how to make beautiful clothes, we've invested a lot in technology and automation to both preserve but kind of digitize the craft of what it means to make beautiful clothes. So we use a lot of 3D printing, fun software and hardware elements in our factory to modernize what it means to be a fine tailor.
Very exciting. Well, I had the pleasure of touring Ferrara Manufacturing recently, and it was a very impressive space. Thank you for joining today. Excited. Jon, please, we'd love to hear a little bit about the work that you've done.
Thanks. So my name is Jon Zornow. I'm the founder of Sewbo, and we're working on bringing industrial automation into clothing factories. So trying to teach robots how to sew. And we're making some progress. So we've been working on this pretty hard for the past 5 years and have a decent amount to show for it. We're right now planning out our very first production line to actually go into a factory and start making clothes using the techniques that we've been developing for the past couple of years. One kind of interesting thing about what we've done so far is that we've mainly been working within the MII ecosystem. So with the support of AFFOA and the Advanced Robotic Manufacturing Institute, we've been able to take this concept, something that I developed a couple of years ago, and by partnering with much larger organizations, people who have the resources and the expertise to actually see this through, we've been able to prove out a lot of the concepts, show that this actually works at the scales where we need it to. And now, after all that, are finally getting ready to deploy it. So it's an exciting time.
Oh, that sounds exciting. And Christine, we'd love to have you share a little bit about your role and the work that Parkdale is already really steeped in this as well. So love to hear more about your work.
Thank you. I'm Christine Spiegel. I head up marketing for the Advanced Materials Division at Parkdale Mills. We're also the owner of US Cotton. We're the largest spun yarn manufacturer in the Western Hemisphere. And currently, my role is taking Cyclo technology, which is a biodegradable additive that is added to fiber, the extrusion process, and it allows ended fabrics that have Cyclo in it to biodegrade in end-of-life environments such as landfills, seawater, soil. And what it's essentially doing is helping us reduce microplastic pollution that's created from shedding of textiles so that those microfibers don't last forever in our environment. As we know, PET is used in pretty much every synthetic or even what we drink. And over the last 15 years, I've had the pleasure of working in various brands such as Reprieve and now Cyclo Technology that allows you to create sustainable textiles that really leave less impact behind on our planet. So the work that we're doing in this space of automation is, as you know, fibers are pennies on the dollar. And so automating in the back end and making sure that efficiencies are involved in the fiber manufacturing process are extremely important. So I'm happy to be a part of this.
Fantastic. Christine and I got to know each other out at the Functional Fabric Fair in Oregon, where we saw a lot of incredible things happening. And just knowing the scope of Parkdale was really interesting, knowing that some of this work has really had to be implemented on the ground floor already, considered, I think, by many to be a highly automated, where it can be sort of factory of the future for this industry. So I'm excited to have a real broad breadth of entrepreneur and digital expert, but also our manufacturers in different tiers of the supply chain. Really exciting. So jumping into the topic, which many of you have already touched on a little bit, but it does seem like we can't go a week these days without hearing about how digital engineering or digital twins, automated factories of the future, AI, as we're trying to get a little beyond the buzz and knowing that your work is all happening at the ground floor, can each of you maybe share a couple of very specific ways that your organization has either been thinking about implementing, have been impacted, or are actually implementing programs that are helping you become more digitally forward and automated in the future? So maybe this time I'll start with Gabrielle.
Great. So this is a topic that I love because, first of all, I just think the apparel and textile industry, if you look at every country that is an industrial powerhouse, they started with apparel and textiles. So apparel and textiles is like the root of all innovation in the industrial sector because it's such a flexible industry. So when we look at our factory, the investments we make in equipment, hardware, and innovation are relatively flexible and inexpensive and not capital intensive. So one thing that we've really loved over the last few years is investing in 3D technology and printing our own parts in-house and using those parts to automate certain parts of the garment. So we're actually able to take our high-level craft that we've been refining with master tailors for 40 years and taking that knowledge and digitizing it and turning it into 3D parts that we use to automatically sew and automate a lot of this really high-end work. What's amazing about that is it actually creates a great pipeline for talent. So instead of having 5-year minimum of sewing experience, all of a sudden we can introduce a whole new workforce into our team that might have 0 years of sewing experience. And I'm sure that Jonathan can talk about this as well, but when you introduce robotics and sewing and automation, it actually increases your workforce pool. So I love automation. I think apparel and textile, there's memes about bringing back apparel and textile back to the United States. I actually think it's essential to reindustrializing our country to start with apparel and textile, because our industry is so flexible and so primed to make these investments in innovations such as 3D printing.
Yes, I love that. I couldn't agree more with everything you shared. Christine, maybe we'll go industry to industry real quick. Christine, we'd love to hear a little bit about how have you implemented automation on the ground floor so far, and are there ways that you're planning for the future?
Yes, absolutely. I think one of the interesting parts when you're talking about automation, it's really about automation doesn't necessarily make the factory more intelligent and the people more capable. It's kind of treated as a cool headline, but then what does it really mean on the automation floor? And so where it really gets real for automation for Parkdale Mills and the manufacturing of fine is about preventing downtime, fiber splicing and those types of things, being able to have AI or any type of automation predict fiber performance before we even produce, or we use it to data to track micro fiber pollution risk in the environment. So the ways of which we use automation is really helping us predict that fiber performance, where we need our labor force, running automation dictated to how the fiber is performing, where do we need the most labor, when is the requirement for us to shift jobs or purposes on that performance floor. So this is the kind of tech that really matters to us, is really predicting, keeping the machines running, and also repurposing employees to much more added value positions within the automation floor, allowing us to increase areas where we can be more productive and more automated, and allowing the automation to help us stay ahead of it versus falling behind. And so when it really solves that problem for what we care about. So that's how we're utilizing it in the fiber space, is really being able to predict it before it occurs.
I love that. And I feel like both answers from the industry partners really spoke to that, sometimes that tension or that concern. Are we taking jobs and creating fewer? First, we know that there's a difficulty already getting some folks interested in the numbers that we need to come in. But I love that idea, and I heard it both ways. It's about creating a more efficient and a more purposeful set of roles that folks could do as maybe some of the other more repetitive and automated tasks get taken care of. So I loved hearing that, and I remember when we first discussed it, you had mentioned that, so that's fantastic. Technologists, Caitlin and Jon, love to hear from you. And Caitlin, we can start. How do you see this work, and what is the area that you're really focused on the technical side to help not only make the digital engineering piece strong and be able to be diffused out into other organizations, but also how is that the first step for automation?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. At AFFOA, of course, we're really passionate about improving and modernizing our own processes. So making sure that we don't just walk the talk, but we actually are doing what we say that others should do. But we're also serving as a translator or an in-between in this space. So digital engineering, automation, you mentioned some of the buzzwords at the beginning, Robert. This industry is really ripe with these buzzwords right now. And the last thing we want to do is modernize and push solutions where the problem doesn't exist. So one of the things that we're doing is showing the ROI on some of these tools and then trying to improve access. One of the ways that we're doing that is through infrastructure. So different infrastructure pieces that are needed, not necessarily just pushing tools, but defining processes that can help. For example, fabric digitalization, another buzzword, but a lot of brands are moving to 3D CAD to design textile products. And in order to do that accurately, you need to have the proper inputs in terms of those digital fabrics. And US mills often don't have the technology or the know-how to create those digital fabric files and provide them to brands. So we've corrected various standard operating procedures to share with those mills to show how to create those digital fabrics, how to communicate the accuracy and the trust in those fabrics to help enable those within the US, because a lot of mills in other countries, they've already implemented these processes and it's very easy to share those digital files. And ultimately, we want to improve access to the designers and the brands making the purchasing decisions and have US mills be more competitive in that case.
Very interesting. Jon.
Well, once the robots come into the picture, it's pretty much all about digitalization and the technology. On our side, we're mostly trying to work with what exists already where we can. Don't want to reinvent the wheel. Also, don't want to come into a massive and effectively ancient industry and try to tell people like, okay, everything has to change. We want to be able to meet manufacturers halfway. Right now, our systems are designed to take in the same cutting file, the same DXF cutting files that you would send to a Gerber or whatever cutter. We can actually feed those directly to the robot and have it generate some of the paths that it needs to make based on those cutting patterns. We're trying to build on what exists and then see where it goes. I have observed or noticed the industry is used to having like very sort of labor intensive practices and tends to avoid, at least I'm in the cut and sew space. I know if you're talking to a mill, if you're talking to fiber manufacturers, they're really used to capital intensive manufacturing modes where you're going to build a factory and you're going to set up all the equipment and it's going to run for a couple of years and you'll make your money back. For cut and sew apparel manufacturers, it tends to be much more, what are we expecting for the next season? How many people will we hire to sit on the floor that year? Depending on where you are, you might have more stability, especially in the like DoD space, but effectively these people are not used to making massive multi-million-dollar hardware investments and then amortizing that over the course of many years. So we want to try to find a balance, be able to like work with the flexibility of the industry, provide them new tools, work with the tools that already exist. And it is a bit of a fine line there. But as you said, definitely a lot of demand, very, very much ripe for innovation in this space.
Yeah. Interesting too. Can I ask, had you thought about other sectors of the supply chain within soft goods and textiles before you chose the cut and sew space, or did it seem naturally aligned to projects you were already launching?
I came at this industry from a very outsider's perspective. So I actually got stuck on the problem of robotic sewing before I learned anything at all about the rest of the industry. So for me, it's been the goal, the holy grail or whatever, since the very beginning. It does seem the least developed space. If you're talking about fibers, we've been doing that for hundreds of years. And I think that's about as advanced as things can get in our industry right now. I'm sure there's a lot more work to do. But when you look at the sewing space, a lot of sewing factories are going to be completely unchanged from 100 years ago. And for me, at least personally, that's been what has motivated me to learn about this and work on it all and try to make some change. I'm sure there are interesting things to be done with fabric cutters, but a lot of people have been working on that for a while, and it's just a little less exciting for me.
Yeah. And Gabrielle, being an industry partner in the cut and sew space, what are some thoughts about some of the nature of the investments that Jon indicated? Do you see those, or do you have a slightly different perspective? And are you equally excited to see some of the way in which the cut and sew operations progress going forward?
Yeah, so I totally agree. Like the cutting side has been fairly automated and focused on because that equipment is expensive and it's big. So historically, investments were made in upgrading that cutting equipment. So we have new cutting machines, and I don't know how much more efficient you can get on cutting. But the sewing side really hasn't changed over the last 100 years. And it's pretty impressive that there hasn't been any investment or innovation in the hardware of how you make clothes. So I totally agree. I think there's tremendous opportunity to automate certain parts of the industry. I think the challenge is, especially for US manufacturers, is how do you innovate on the equipment and invest in automation in a way that supports small batch and flexible style changes? Because overseas, they might be making millions of something, but here in the US, you're making hundreds. So how do you create automation that can support hundreds of a style? And so that's one of the reasons why I think there hasn't been a huge investment in upgrading the US cut and sew, or really sew space. And I think now is the right time because the cost of creating that technology has gone substantially down. So, Jon, I don't know if you agree with me on that part, but
Absolutely. Both
yeah.
parts. Yeah. To the extent that we've seen people trying, the failures can mostly be attributed to lack of flexibility and inability to deal with very small batches and high mix stuff. So I think you're right on the money there.
Yeah, and I think there was a case study where there was a shoe factory that someone tried to set up in Texas, I believe, and they hired consultants from Apple to help set up this factory. I'm blanking on the name, but I just loved that story because people from the hardware space came in trying to apply hardware techniques to soft goods, and it is its own animal. Soft goods are really challenging. Fabrics change. Working with soft material is really difficult because it doesn't stay in the same place. It's not consistent. So I think it's one of the hardest areas to automate. And I think now is the time with the cost of hardware declining to make those investments.
It's a phenomenal discussion. I love seeing some of the agreements that come out of this across technology and industry. And I have a question probably for our industry partners, if that's okay. So we had done a recent industry needs assessment, and a few of the findings are not shockers here, that many of our industry folks have cited an aging workforce as being a bit of a concern, particularly with an inability to recruit younger generations in. And so one of the hypotheses we've had is as these factories become a little more digitally forward, automated, are we going to see an uptick in attracting younger and just more energetic people to come into the field? So in even just the small steps taken to do some automation, Ferrara, and then some of the other ways that you've automated, Christine, at Parkdale, I'd love to hear, have you seen any changes or any ways in which you're needing to accommodate new processes for the workforce?
To your point, this is a weird moment in time because with this aging force, on one hand, we can't hire fast enough to replace institutional knowledge that's actually walking out the door with that aging workforce. But on the other hand, we've got people terrified a machine is going to replace them, or how do I really operate these machines? And as I mentioned, both are very true. They don't have to really be enemies. In our industry, we feel like we need to really reset and stop selling manufacturing the same old ways that we've done before and show that people who are keeping these systems running are the future. It includes jobs not only just in the automation side, but it's in data management, being able to predict AI. We're looking at sustainability and how do we utilize this automation for compliance, material handling, and even storytelling, and being able to help our younger workforce understand that these aren't lost jobs. They just need to be redefined and repurposed to more profitable areas as they start to shift and utilize automation in several areas. In manufacturing for fiber, there are so many different types of automation from spinning. We look at ways that we can look for machines that can combine 3 processes into one, allowing us to maximize efficiencies and minimize the times when fibers shouldn't be touched by human hand to ensure the quality that we expect, but while taking that individual and putting them in a different place and making that job more sexy for them to realize. I think what we're seeing in that workforce is the fear of how do I learn how to run that machine? And the sexy part of this is elevating an individual's skills to be technically capable of running automation is an incredible field that you go into. And we've got people on the factory floor that can be educated through the automation that really elevates their ability to add a substantial amount of technical skills on their resume they never thought they would have before.
I love that. And that might be the ultimate promise. That's very well said. Thank you so much for that. So I think it came up just briefly, but I'm just going to name that elephant in the room, or maybe there was another elephant. We're going to call out another elephant, which is just getting into it. We may not have seen quite a moment like this for US manufacturing. And I'm sure on the industry side, for good or for ill, it's exciting to hear that US manufacturing is a real priority right now. It might give you some palpitations as you think, how do we make sure we're staffed up for that? So I just thought I would touch on it. Is there anything in today's climate with this focus on US manufacturing, the scrambling, the changes, but also the seeming enthusiasm that makes this topic even more important? When I say this topic, really any topic, what do you see right now that is causing some real true moments of optimism, and then perhaps some moments that you're like, we really should do these two things before we get too optimistic? And I'm just going to say, anyone who would like to pop off and say they'd like to start, I'd love for that. Just raise a hand or come off the mic. John, looks like you've got your hand. Let's hear it.
Yeah, I just can't get over the past couple of months. We have an inquiries inbox where the web forms and everything else dump into, and it has just exploded. There are so many people in the US and internationally who have decided that this is going to be, they want to take manufacturing in-house. They want to start to bring on automation capabilities. They want to, I'll say it's interesting because a lot of the requests I've gotten, especially from within the US, are from people who don't seem to have any manufacturing experience. And so it's clearly, this is the topic and people are so excited about it right now. When we dig into the details, it does seem like we have a lot of ground to cover before at least the generic brand retailer, whoever in the US, are actually going to be able to take advantage of this.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's exciting though. A good,
Mhm.
good sign on the Sewbo sign. Great. Caitlin?
Sure. Yeah, I would echo that too. And just there is clearly a sense of urgency right now and a lot of scrambling, like you were saying, Robert. And that's in one sense, that energy is really exciting, but also that urgency without coordination will just lead to duplication and fatigue and efforts that don't really go anywhere. So I think that conversations like this and also sharing best practices and learnings and discussing actually how things can be implemented rather than just the excitement about doing it is really going to be important at this stage. Otherwise, I think that there will maybe be little bits of investment along the pathway, but we actually need to move the bar forward.
Well said.
Robert, I will just chiming in here.
Please.
On the fiber manufacturing side, we consider this to be one of the biggest do-overs for US manufacturing in the last probably 50 years. And being able to look at what does our supply chain really look like in the US if we have to look at, bringing manufacturing back. On the Parkdale side, the changes through administration can contribute substantially only because it is forcing the US base to really look at the supply chain, but it's also created a bit of a panic because we realize that we don't have the capacity to do exactly what we want to do, even though we need to. So this shot of redesigning manufacturing is actually bringing automation, as Jonathan mentioned, to the highest level, because it's the way that production will be able to handle the capacity that's going to be requested on the US side of it.
I love that. Gabrielle?
Yeah, so I think this is a very exciting time. It's so important that we're having this conversation because I remember 10 years ago when I started at Ferrara, people didn't even know what manufacturing really meant when you talked about manufacturing as a career path. And now I think there's been a few articles about Gen Z wanting to be hands-on and using tools in their hands. And I think there's a real interest, not just from companies, but from the next generation to be able to make things. So I think it's very exciting trends happening. What our industry needs and what all manufacturers need is long-term planning capabilities, which right now we don't really have with the current change in policy every other day. And we're getting a lot of phone calls, but I think as a country, we need to develop what's our plan to incentivize manufacturing to invest long-term here. I know that we only make 2% of the clothes that we consume in the United States. So when we talk about increasing capacity, doubling that capacity is probably not very difficult. But if we want to go beyond that, we need to create long-term stability to incentivize people to build new plants, invest in new equipment, invest in innovation and automation. And so what do those policies look like? And that's what I think we need to figure out as a country.
Yeah. Love that. You actually, I think you pulled that thread, to use a textiles pun, right into sort of our last closing message. And for the panelists, if you had something you'd like to share with your employees, fellow manufacturers, or the US government as we're thinking through this time right now, what words might you want to share? And then maybe a parting message to everybody on this team for how we can continue to expand. Gabrielle, that was a great foundation for us, so thank you. Christine, Jonathan, Caitlin, anyone want to volunteer?
I think for me on the industry side is let's stop competing on who's more innovative and start aligning on what moves the needle, the supply chain, the talent pipeline, the future of production, the purpose, and making sure that we're all ensuring that it's really all connected. And in talking with the workforce and even going back to aging and how are we going to help get our younger audience interested in manufacturing, that we have to remind them it's not that grandparents' factory floor anymore. It's smarter, it's faster, it's more purpose driven. And we need people to also think across systems and care more about what we're doing and the purpose behind it. I think in the manufacturing space and even coming from fiber, how do you make fiber interesting? And it's about the purpose. So we're creating fibers and working with others that can help minimize the impact on our planet. So the younger audience, that purpose driven, can draw them into our manufacturing. And I think that all needs to really be connected in our industry. So those are my thoughts.
Christine, loved every piece of that. That is absolutely so spot on. And I loved the way you said it. And I agree, competing to be more innovative a lot of times just leads to more innovation that's tough to find where it fits. Making real impact, I think, is more about collaborative. Love that. Caitlin or John?
Sure. I love the fact that both you, Robert, and Christine brought up collaboration instead of competition. I think that a lot of the digital engineering work that needs to be done to modernize this and get the workforce to where it needs to be is the unglamorous standardization and making things consistent across the industry. The tools that are being developed are fantastic, but really the standardization and collaboration needs to be done. Otherwise, you're just going to be making little widgets that work in a small case, like Gabrielle, you mentioned, maybe to double the capacity within the US, but not to have that transformative change. And I think also it's not just a technology transition, it's really a cultural transition. So there's going to be a lot of barriers along the way, and there are a lot of people that don't understand the benefit of it. And part of that is because maybe it's unclear. There's a lot of buzzwords. The ROI isn't super clear. So I think as an industry, we have to be better at pushing for standardization and not just a tool that fits the current need, and then also sharing that with the rest of the industry.
No, I love that. I couldn't agree more. John?
It's interesting because when you put the question up, my first two thoughts were collaboration and standardization. So we've hit the most important points here. We're starting from a kind of difficult place. It's been a generation or two since we were doing this at large scales. The world has changed, the technologies have changed, the culture has shifted. And when we look at trying to build everything back up now, there's just so much work to do. And so having standards so that one person's innovation will benefit another group, having collaboration so that you can have people with ideas working with bigger companies or nonprofits and stuff like that. These end up making, I think, a huge impact. Just to make it about me, the personal story was I had this idea how we could tackle it. And I went around and took some meetings with manufacturers and this and that. Everyone was like, okay, cool. Well, we love automation. Let us know when it's ready. And I was like, okay, like how are we going to do this? And it was really only possible through the MII ecosystem that we were able to get access to the knowledge, the expertise, the partners, the research support, but all together, we had an idea, and this would have died on the table if it weren't for the support of these organizations and the larger players in the industry who were willing to give us their time and expertise and help get things stood up to the point where we now actually can demonstrate it and talk about putting this into a factory. In this era where we're starting to question the value of like government research support and things like this, I think that it's going to be very hard to achieve our goals for manufacturing if we're not being very supportive of this transition.
Very well said. Very well said. I will have to say, I can't thank this group enough. I thought it was a perfect sort of cross-sector of the industry with some technology, regionally, really exciting conversation, very topical. My mission space is trying to figure out how to get more industry, the sort of talent pipelines that they're looking for. I think that digital and automation, factories of the future, I think that's a piece of that. And I love that we're moving along a progression toward that. So thank you again for joining us. Really looking forward to more continued collaboration in the future. Thank you for joining us for this episode of ATA's Talking Textiles. ATA is a not-for-profit association representing the international specialty fabrics marketplace. Learn more about the events, workshops, and webinars ATA hosts all throughout the year at textiles.org/events.